Hello and welcome to today's webinar, SharePoint for Professional Services. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly via email. If you're interested in trying out the enterprise version of Harmony, please send us a request in the chat window and someone will contact you after the webinar to get you started. We'll also make a recording of the webcast available to you within a couple of days. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Richard Poole, Chief Technology Officer of EMEA at Harmony. Richard heads up the pre-sales team for Harmony across the EMEA and Asia Pacific regions, working both directly with key accounts as well as Harmony's partner channel. Bringing with him almost 20 years of experience in data management systems, Richard has helped many companies to realize the significant benefits in productivity that collaborative platforms enable. Before joining Harmony in 2011, Richard worked for Dassault Systems PLM for over 10 years. Richard also has a Bachelor of Engineering degree in Automotive Engineering from Loughborough University. Richard, please get us started.
Thank you very much, Susan, and welcome everyone to this month's session. This is the theme of the session is really around professional services, but I think the same thing can apply to many other different industries and use cases as well. But we've got quite a few customers in this space where they're using Harmony very successfully to manage both emails and documents in SharePoint. So I think some of the challenges that particularly those kind of use cases where people are working very heavily with clients, a lot of communication is done by email. There's kind of three categories of emails that you typically receive in your own mailbox, and we can kind of like put those into three sections. So one is like emails that are just transient emails, maybe somebody asking a question or an informal update about some announcement or something. And those don't really need to be managed. They're, to be honest, they probably make up the bulk of the emails in people's mailboxes. But generally you can delete those without any issues. The other two are really kind of around, email records that you need to retain for maybe, compliance requirements. And the other ones are kind of important business emails that, okay, I may need to refer to in the future, I may need to find, or one of my colleagues who's working on the same project may need to access, although the email wasn't necessarily sent to them. So we need a mechanism to be able to capture, classify, and manage those so that you can easily find them in the future, whether that's for, to bring up something that was discussed previously, or to maybe for me to reply to an email that my colleague had actually received, particularly around kind of advisory or kind of the areas where professional services really are focused on. So the kind of, if we focus on those important business emails for a moment, because they could be correspondence with clients, they could be knowledge sharing, so that you can reuse experience that you've garnered before. It might be that, say, in a professional services organization, there might be a high employee turnover, or there may be people move between projects, so you can't really rely on okay, I'm the project manager for this project and I will be forevermore. That's not always the case. The project manager might change at various points, or the main point of contact or whatever. So also kind of around putting together proposals, it's not just necessarily one person who's working on a proposal for a piece of work or a piece of advice, for example. And it may need colleagues to actually interact with that and prepare those collaboratively amongst a team. but also being compliant with various records management capabilities and also industry regulations as well, because it's important to not only retain information that you need, but also to not retain information that you don't need. And that's kind of like the flip side of that. So the four main, or let's say biggest email management challenges, if you break that down into four sections. One is, like, it's very difficult to have a consistent way of managing emails. Some people might manage emails in, say, public folders, for example. Other people might manage them in their own PST files or in a shared mailbox, for example. And even in, one single organization, every person could manage content in different ways, which means it's not it's not a streamlined way of managing emails, and also it means that you can't find it very easily as well. Also, the kind of retention schedules that may apply to different projects, different type of projects, different customers, different industries, or different regions, for example. If it's a multinational company that work across multiple countries, then you do have to work in different ways, maybe in the US than you do in Europe, or vice versa, and even individual countries. Also, I think search is a challenge to find the emails that you need to get hold of. Can be very difficult, even if you've put in like a kind of archiving solution, say on Exchange, so that all emails are kept for X amount of days and archived off. It's still very difficult to actually retrieve the information because it may be very costly to actually do that. Obviously e-discovery is kind of like a legal kind of requirement, but it's a very heavy process. So being able to actually find an email that one of my colleagues has used in the past, and I want to kind of see what advice was given, it's very difficult to do that when people aren't managing emails very effectively. And also there's a lack of end-to-end governance. That as organizations change, you still need to be able to retrieve information that was stored maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, or as part of the project. So with that, we'd just like to ask a quick poll question, please.
So if you could please answer the question that you see on your screen. How are you currently storing emails related to client inquiries and requests? Are you storing them in SharePoint, in Exchange, a different off-the-shelf document and email management system, a bespoke solution, or you're actually looking for a new solution? And we'll just leave this open for a minute to give you a chance to let us know. Great, thank you. Let's let you all see what you're doing. Richard.
Excellent, thank you very much. So it looks like the largest proportion are managing them in Exchange in some ways, whether that's in mailboxes, shared mailboxes, public folders, for example. But there's a growing kind of component that people are managing emails in SharePoint, which is, it's definitely a good solution because it's a collaborative environment. And let's take a look at some of those options in a bit more detail, because obviously there are different ways to manage emails. And it could be like a dedicated third-party solution for email management, which can typically be quite heavy, both to implement but also to maintain and manage. Whether it's the services required to roll it out, but also the usage of it, I think is quite heavy for a lot of end users. And as I say, the maintenance of actually running that. I know some solutions that require 10 or 12 servers to be up and running all the time and things as well. So if you're using Microsoft capabilities, obviously for email and for document management and things, then there are a number of different ways to actually manage your emails, for example. So kind of out of the box solutions with Microsoft are really based around using Exchange to manage emails and SharePoint to manage documents. But the thing is, it kind of like keeps those two separate, and I think a lot of our customers really benefit from being able to manage emails and documents together because they're related. It might be like a document that you're sending and working on, but there's maybe like a proposal or something as a document, but then there's a lot of email dialogue that relates to that project or that piece of advice that needs to be captured as well. So having them in two different places can be quite a challenge. And Microsoft are obviously adding some more capabilities around kind of retentions and records management and things, particularly with the likes of implementing labels, which are available both in Exchange and SharePoint. But at the moment, they're quite limited. They are really focused around more retention capabilities rather than adding kind of business logic to interrelate information between Exchange and SharePoint, for example. And that's something that Harmony is actually looking to utilize as well. So we will be adding support for labels, obviously in SharePoint as almost like an extra piece of metadata, like we already support, but also to be able to identify what labels to apply to a piece of information. So that's something that we're looking at the moment on our roadmap, is being able to actually identify from the context of an email what label should be applied or what label should be suggested to the user to apply in terms of like how long it should be retained or how it should be classified, and also being able to add additional metadata as well. So that is definitely something that we're looking to utilize. But obviously metadata in SharePoint is very important, and if you're capturing emails into SharePoint, you then have the benefit of using metadata across both the emails and the documents that are being stored, and then you can use those to categorize, manage, and find and discover both the emails and the documents very, very easily. So with that, we'd just like to ask another poll question, please.
So if you could answer, are you using Microsoft labels to apply retention policies? Yes, you're using them in place. They're emails in Exchange and documents in SharePoint. Or yes, emails and documents in SharePoint. Yes, only for emails in Exchange. Yes, only for documents in SharePoint, or not at all. And I think you're going to be, oh, the results will be, I'll show you in just a minute. Okay. Here you go.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you for replying. So the vast majority at the moment, it looks like, if you are not using labels yet, and it may be that you might consider using labels in the future. But in fact, the next highest one there is actually for documents in SharePoint, which is absolutely what we'll be adding support for first. So that's very much aligned with what we're doing and what you guys are doing, and what we're seeing with most people that we speak to, that labels is something that is interesting, and people are starting to see how they can utilize them, and I'm sure they'll evolve as we move forward. Excellent. So I think we can all say that the best one single place for managing emails and documents is SharePoint. It sounds like some of you are already managing emails in SharePoint as well, or are looking to do so. So SharePoint is the best platform, but there's there's a few things that are kind of lacking, let's say, in terms of the user interface. Because it may be, that people have come from a more bespoke system and now you're looking to use SharePoint, or they've come from like file share, public folders, for example, that everything's in Outlook. So if you just roll out SharePoint and say you want to manage emails in SharePoint and even like document management, it can be really challenging to end users, because they might be used to having that kind of tight integration with email, so that you can capture, but also so that you can share content. When you're sending a document, for example, to somebody, doing that while you're composing the email is kind of like a key requirement. And potentially, you know, sending links by default as well, so that people are working on the content and the correspondence in the same place. So on its own, SharePoint is not necessarily the best single interface that business users really want to or like spending their time in, and giving them the full capabilities that they need. As I say, SharePoint is the best platform, so it's the ideal single platform, but it does need those extra capabilities. And it's the ideal solution because you can manage the content together in context. Metadata can be applied to both documents and emails, so that you can organize the content very easily, and you've got a single place to search for information. So SharePoint is the best solution in Outlook with Harmony, so that you've got a complete solution to manage your emails, your correspondence, and the documentation that professional services and, as I say, other companies and industries really need. And I think, you know, obviously being in that kind of Outlook environment, you really do collaborate with both clients and colleagues or you need to, and being able to collaborate by email, capturing both documents and emails in a single interface, but also sending information by email, and even maintaining the version history when you're sending documentation out to a client and asking them to make some changes. So we'll see that as we go through, and we'll give you a short demonstration towards the end of the session. But also with colleagues, so internally, as I say, you know, like, it's not like there's necessarily just one person working with one client. There's often, you know, lots of, you know, a team of people working on a client, but also each individual might be managing a number of different clients. So, you know, collaborating within the organization is always a challenge. So kind of sending content between each other, sharing content with each other easily, so that you can maintain the version history and all be working on the same document, for example, or the same information, and keeping up to date when something has been updated, and also avoiding the duplication of content as well. So when you're capturing emails, capturing documents, it's not always obvious as to what content you should be saving. So something we're developing at the moment is the concept of actually identifying what we call topics from the emails that you're actually reading, and suggesting other content that relates to the same topic. So by identifying the topics from the email that you're looking at, being able to then see related content, whether it's documents in SharePoint, OneDrive, or Teams, or emails in both Exchange and SharePoint. So I can see here, for example, you know, like there's some content in SharePoint, which might be emails, but also I've got some content in my mailbox that is related to this particular email I'm reading, and I may want to save that into SharePoint. So giving the user a helping hand to say, here's other related content that you might want to be capturing in that repository, but also suggesting where you want to save that content as well, because again, you know, there's different ways to manage your content, whether it's in different sites, different libraries. You might be using Teams, for example, to manage some content. So Harmony is able to actually suggest where you may want to save the content that you're looking at based on those topics that have been identified as well. So suggesting the right place. Also, as I say, finding the related information. So here we can see an example, excuse me, of where Harmony is identifying those topics from an email that I've received, and by clicking on those topics, we can then actually go and retrieve the related information, as I say, whether it's in Exchange or SharePoint or Teams or OneDrive. So across your Office 365 environment, and presenting to you related information. So it might be information that you may not have seen before, but you have permission to access. So it's content that you should be seeing, but you may not have seen because you're not just there searching all the time and browsing around the various locations. So keeping focus on what you're actually working on, but bringing the context into the information that you want to see. So just a few words about one of our professional services customers. I think it's a fairly household name, Ernst & Young. They've been using Harmony for the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, and they've rolled out to their entire tax division. Basically, they've put together a platform based on SharePoint for managing documents and emails. And Harmony is a fundamental part of that, both to capture the content, but also to work on the information in SharePoint and sharing content as well. So it's, as I say, it's been very well used for up to 40,000 EY tax workers globally. So it's a well-proven deployment. And they're also planning to look at other areas where Harmony can be utilized as well, because we do have some other kind of flavors of Harmony for example, Outlook in a browser, or the Office applications and things like that, like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. So with that, we'd just like to give you a short demonstration of what Harmony's all about. So as I say, the main interface of Harmony is a rich client in Outlook that gives you access to the locations that you need to work in. So for example, here I can see my OneDrive, so the content that I might be working on myself. These are my personal documents, but equally I can go and see any of the teams that I'm a member of as well, and see the content that is shared with that team. So I think, as obviously Microsoft introduced Teams a little while ago, people are more and more trying to see where they can use Teams. And obviously the documentation that relates to a team is in fact a SharePoint site that's tied to the team. So here I can work on my content directly. I can save and capture emails and documents and things just by dragging and dropping them into the sidebar. And we'll see that a little bit more as we go through this short demonstration. So if I go into like a SharePoint site, you'll see that the libraries and the lists that you have permission to access. It's nice and easy to navigate around. So if we go into an example document library here, you'll see that this particular document library is being actually organized by metadata. So there's a number of different ways to manage your content in SharePoint. And this is one of them. And I think it's the best approach to really utilize the capabilities of SharePoint as you move forward. So for example, here I've got documentation that I've saved into this library, or maybe some of my colleagues have saved as well, and it's been categorized for a particular project in this case. So it could be like I've got multiple libraries managing different content, or I can actually manage content in the same place. So in this interface, I can see maybe that I've received an email that relates to EY, and I want to capture it into SharePoint. So I can easily do that just by dragging and dropping it on top of the piece of metadata. So from an end user's point of view, it's very, very easy to start to grasp the concept of using metadata, filling that information in, because we can present it to the user in a nice, intuitive way. So we can see here, the user hasn't really had to fill in any information. All I've done is dragged it onto that piece of metadata, and Harmony has set that in SharePoint. It's also set the content type for the email that I'm saving. It's also mapped the header information of where or who sent the email, when it was received, all that kind of information. And if there's additional metadata, then the user has the opportunity to fill that in. So I'm just going to save that and check the item into SharePoint so it's available to other users. So you've always got the opportunity for example, to add comments to the version and things. So you can version control your documents and things as well as your email content as well. So we can see here, for example, that I've saved that email. I can open it up just by clicking it, and that will open exactly as it was received. Nothing's been changed about that email message, and it means that it's now searchable and usable across SharePoint. So anybody who has access to this library can now access that email and could reply to it in the future to carry on the process. It's also marked in my Outlook as being saved to SharePoint with the location, and we can add like a category, a property to the email as well to say where it's been saved. And this is all contextual, so I can click on it and navigate directly to it. Also, it's not only emails that I might want to capture, it's documentation as well. So it might be that like somebody has sent me a contract that or a draft contract or a request for information or something. So I want to capture that as well. So I can easily just drag and drop that on top of that project name to save that document there as well. So Harmony knows how to manage both documents and emails in the right way. So in this case, it's actually asking me what type of document this is, and then present me with the corresponding metadata. And again, we can see that that project name is automatically set. We can also just filter the information there so that we can see the required information in a kind of more basic form, which can really help people to start to, again, use metadata and work in the best possible way. So if I save that, again, that's going to get checked in and made available to other users. I can automatically check that in just based on the settings that I have. I just have that so that you can see what's actually going on at this point in time. And because the emails and the documents are there in context, I can work on them directly from here. So I can check out this the proposal. I can work on it. I can maybe make some comments to it and check it back in. I can see the version history. I can see all the metadata, but also I can preview that information directly from here. So without having to leave my kind of comfort zone of Outlook, which I'm receiving and sending emails all the time, it's just very nice and easy to be able to navigate around the content that's been stored in SharePoint, so I can see the related information, the related emails that have been captured against that particular project without necessarily having to open them up. So now that content is in SharePoint, we can see that we can utilize multiple views in this particular library. So I've got it, my default view there, just being grouped by that project name, but also I could group it by other information, like in this case the region, or I could have like a filtered view defined, which is just showing the emails stored in this library, grouped by the project name and displaying email specific metadata. So these are views coming from SharePoint and displayed to me in the Harmony interface. It not only works obviously in Harmony, but if I go to that view in SharePoint, I would get the same kind of view as we see here. So those emails organized and grouped by the project information, but also displaying like the email information that's been captured by Harmony in my Outlook interface. So now we've got that content in SharePoint, maybe I want to actually share some of that content. So if we go back to the view that we were working before, you can see I can navigate back to like the project document view that we had, and you'll see that it remembers what I had expanded and what item I last had selected. So it might be that I want to, let's say, send this contract to the client in order to progress the project that I'm working on. Maybe it's a piece of tax advice or a new project that we're working on. So for example, now if I compose a new email, we'll see that Harmony is available in my email messages. So if I send this to Susan, for example, and say, this is a new contract, then I can simply drag and drop the document from the location that I'm working on into the email that I'm sending to Susan. So when she receives that link, she can simply click on it to open it up from SharePoint. Or if she has Harmony, even if she's working somewhere else or has the sidebar closed, she can right click on that and say, open that item up in Harmony. And it will take her directly to the right view and the right item so that she can actually work on it from there without necessarily opening up the document, because she may want to see the version history and what comments were added and those kind of things. But also when I'm sending a link, I don't necessarily know whether Susan has access to this particular document. So when I hit send, Harmony's able to check whether she has access. And we can see from this that actually Susan doesn't have access to this particular document. So I can choose to grant her view or edit capabilities depending on how the sharing functionality has been enabled or configured in your SharePoint environment. So I can grant her access so that she can access the link when she receives it. However, there may well be times when you're sending that document to the client and you can't give them access to a SharePoint environment, or maybe that feature is disabled in SharePoint. So I need to send it as an attachment, and I can do that just by holding down the Alt key while I drag and drop the document, and it will be attached to the email instead. So I can send that on its way to Susan, maybe for her to make some comments. Now it's very, very common, like if I now send that to Susan and she sends it back, she may well have changed the file name because she's made some changes to the document itself. And if I try to save that back into SharePoint now, by downloading it locally and then browsing or whatever in the web interface, it's going to be added as a completely new document. It's nothing to do with the document that I sent out because it's got a different file name. However, with Harmony, because I've got that interface right in front of me at my fingertips, I can drag it on top of the existing document, just wait for a few seconds, and then I'm given the option to actually add it as a new version. You can change the delay on that so that you can make it more of a conscious effort to the end user. But here you can see that it's actually checking out the document from SharePoint. It's renaming the file that I've received back to the original file name, and it's giving me the opportunity to update any of the metadata. So maybe now we've got this document in process. I'm going to save that, and I can add a comment to say that this was edited by client. And now I've maintained the version history of that content in SharePoint, even though it was edited outside of SharePoint by the client who doesn't have access to my internal SharePoint environment. So I think, throughout the whole kind of managing advice or client information and putting it all in one place, Harmony really does address that requirement in many different ways. So with that, I think we've just got one last question.
So while I ask Richard the questions that you're asking, please could you answer the following question? Would you like to be contacted by one of our Harmony representatives if you're an existing customer, you'd like to trial Harmony, you just have some questions, or no thanks? And while you're answering, let's see. Richard, so you said, if I understand your presentation, if I transfer an email to SharePoint via Harmony, it moves the Outlook metadata as well so that I maintain the conversation view of the emails. Is that true?
Yeah, so when we're capturing the email and it's either copying or moving the email into SharePoint, we're able to capture the metadata from the email automatically. So if I just go through that process a moment again, to say, okay, actually I've got actually let's move to a different library where we've got some different views, because this is kind of going to illustrate, I think, the question that was asked, where I'm saving emails into this library and we're capturing the header information like we saw before, but I'm also able to capture specific information about the emails as well, things like the conversation ID or the conversation topic, for example. So if we've got an example here whereby I've created a view which is being grouped by the conversation topic. So because we're able to capture that information, I can create a view based on it, which means that now I've got like a conversation type view of the content that's been saved into SharePoint. So, for example, now if I preview these emails that have been saved, we'll see that actually there was a whole dialogue that went through being saved to SharePoint, and I can organize and group those together so that I'm not losing the context of the dialogue that's been maybe going backwards and forwards between the client or between various representatives from the organization.
Great, thank you. The next is, can Harmony assist users when they're attaching multiple attachments? I assume he means uploading multiple attachments.
Yeah, excuse me, yes, absolutely. So if you've got emails with multiple attachments, I mean, we saw that we can drag and drop, but you can also right-click and say save the attachments to SharePoint, and then you will have a list actually of all the attachments to that email, and you can choose which ones you actually want to upload into SharePoint. So you can take multiple items and save those in one go. Likewise, if you're saving multiple emails, then just do a multiple select and drag and drop those into the sidebar as well.
Great, thank you. Can I disable the ability to grant permission when sharing content with another user?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first off, it will only allow that if the mechanism is enabled in SharePoint. But if you want to restrict it from the Harmony side, then there are obviously options in the client configuration to say, okay, when I'm, can I save documents? Can I share documents from the interface? And we can restrict that completely. All the options are controlled via registry keys, so you can actually lock these down and grey them out so that users can't change them via group policy, for example, or as part of the deployment of the client.
Okay. Are permissions managed through SharePoint and Harmony, or just through SharePoint?
The permissions are controlled entirely in SharePoint. So we connect to SharePoint using standard Microsoft Web Services. So everything is fully security trimmed. We don't add an extra layer of security on top of what SharePoint is already doing. So as long as you're authenticated as the right user via Harmony into your SharePoint environment, everything is then controlled via SharePoint, and that's in real time as well. So, for example, like if I wasn't able to check out an item, I just wouldn't see that option here, or it would be grayed out for me. And if the permissions get changed between me navigating to this library and right-clicking on it, that will be read dynamically.
Okay. Can you send a document encrypted using Harmony, like password protected, if you want to share sensitive information with a third party?
Harmony doesn't have its own like kind of built-in encryption or password protecting of documents, but obviously if the document is password protected in SharePoint, then when you send that to the client, it's still going to be password protected as well.
Okay. Even though there are more questions, I think I'm just going to ask one or two so that we can all get an extra 15 minutes to do what we need to do today. So here we go. Can Harmony be used in conjunction with RMS for access rights, or does Harmony functionality replace the need for RMS?
So the RMS rights management is kind of where we were just talking about in terms of password protecting or whatever. So as I say, Harmony, when you're sending something, it's taking it from SharePoint and it's adding it into an email. So if you've got anything in place that's doing rights management either in SharePoint or in Exchange, those are still going to be applied. Basically, it's the same as you downloading the document to the desktop and then composing an email. and adding it into the email. It's just giving you an easier way to do it. So we're not, as I say, we're not adding extra rights management or anything like that on top of what you've already done in Exchange and SharePoint, but it will utilize whatever you've got in place.
All right, I'm going to call this the last question. If I'm using the Harmony Enterprise Edition, will I automatically get updated to the newest versions?
No. So because the Enterprise Edition is really geared towards being managed as a rollout, as a managed client application, basically it's pushed out as an MSI package, which should be done by IT rather than by end users. So we basically release a new version of Harmony pretty much every quarter. So your admin can always download the latest version of Harmony and update the client in a managed way so that all users get the same version, rather than different people updating their own clients and stuff. So yeah, the enterprise version is not dynamically or automatically updated, but it should be done in a managed way.
Great, thank you. If we haven't answered your question, someone will get in touch with you shortly to do that. Richard, thank you for that presentation. Thank all of you for joining us today. You will receive an email with the link to view this webinar again in a couple of days, and we look forward to meeting you again at our next webinar. Thank you.